At her husband's grave, a widow met a silent rancher who held the same locket she buried. Hello, beautiful souls. Before we dive into today's heart-wrenching story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Yes, right now. And in the comments below, tell me where in the world you're listening to this incredible story. Are you curled up in your bedroom in New York? Maybe you're driving through the countryside in Texas. Or perhaps you're halfway across the world in Australia. I want to know. Your stories inspire me to keep bringing you these emotional journeys. Now, grab your tissues because today's story will take you on a roller coaster of emotions that you'll never forget. This is a tale of love, loss, and the mysterious connections that bind us beyond what we can see or understand. So buckle up, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate and second chances. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The Montana wind cut through my black dress like it was made of paper, but I barely felt it. Standing here at Thomas's grave, 3 months after we'd laid him to rest, I still couldn't believe he was gone. The headstone read, "Thomas Michael Crawford, beloved husband," in simple letters that seemed too small for the man who'd filled my entire world for 15 years. I knelt down and placed fresh wildflowers on the mound of earth that had finally stopped looking so raw. The grass was beginning to grow back, tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil like hope trying to break through grief. My fingers traced the edges of the stone, still warm from the afternoon sun. "I brought your favorite coffee today," I whispered, setting the thermos beside the flowers. "Colombian blend, just like you liked it on Sunday mornings when we'd sit on the porch and watch the sunrise." The silence stretched around me, broken only by the distant sound of cattle lowing somewhere beyond the cemetery gates. This place had become my sanctuary, the only spot where I could still feel close to him. Our little house felt too empty, too quiet without his laughter echoing through the rooms. I pulled the silver locket from beneath my dress, the one he'd given me on our first anniversary. Inside was a tiny photo of us from our wedding day, both of us so young and full of dreams. Thomas had saved for months to buy it, working extra shifts at the ranch where he'd been a foreman. I'd never taken it off, not even when the chain had broken twice and I'd had to get it repaired. "I miss you so much, it physically hurts," I told the headstone, my voice cracking. "Dr. Martinez says it's normal, that grief is just love with nowhere to go. But Tom, I don't know how to love nothing. I don't know how to love a memory." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Thomas had always loved. He used to say that Montana sunsets were God's way of reminding us that even endings could be beautiful. I'd rolled my eyes at his romantic notions then, but now I clung to every word he'd ever spoken like they were lifelines. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something that made my heart skip. There, about 20 feet away, stood a man I'd never seen before. He was tall and lean, wearing a weathered cowboy hat and boots that had seen years of hard work. But it wasn't his appearance that froze me in place. It was what he was holding. In his calloused hands was a locket, not just any locket, but one that looked exactly like mine. The same intricate silver pattern, the same delicate chain, the same way the light caught the surface. I blinked hard, wondering if grief was finally making me see things that weren't there. The man noticed me staring and touched the brim of his hat in a polite nod. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep, with a sadness that seemed to match my own. He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he just stood there, holding that impossible locket like it was the most precious thing in the world. I wanted to call out to him, to ask him where he'd gotten it, but my voice had abandoned me completely. We stood there in the growing twilight, two strangers in a cemetery, connected by something I couldn't begin to understand. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing behind a row of old oak trees. I looked down at my own locket, then back to where the man had been standing. The rational part of my mind said it was just a coincidence, that there were probably thousands of similar lockets in the world, but my heart knew better. My heart knew that some connections can't be explained by logic or reason. Driving home that night, I couldn't shake the image of those grey eyes and that familiar locket. For the first time in months, I felt something other than crushing grief. I felt curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny spark of hope. Chapter 2. The Rancher's Secret. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those storm-grey eyes and that impossible locket. By 5 in the morning, I'd given up on rest and was sitting at my kitchen table with my third cup of coffee, staring out at the empty fields beyond our property. Thomas and I had bought this little house on the outskirts of Billings when we were newlyweds, dreaming of filling it with children and laughter. The children never came, something about my body that the doctors couldn't quite fix. But we'd been happy anyway. Thomas had a way of making every day feel like an adventure, even when we were just grocery shopping or watching old movies on the couch. The morning passed in a blur of meaningless tasks. I organized closets that were already organized, cleaned windows that were already clean, and tried to convince myself that I hadn't really seen what I thought I'd seen. But by noon, I was back in my car, driving toward the cemetery like I was being pulled by an invisible thread. This time, I parked at the far end of the lot and walked slowly between the headstones, telling myself I was just visiting Thomas again. But my eyes kept scanning the grounds, looking for a tall figure in a cowboy hat. He wasn't there. I spent an hour at Thomas's grave, talking to him about everything and nothing. I told him about the strange man, about the locket, about how I was probably losing my mind from loneliness. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders, and for a moment I almost felt peaceful. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mum." I turned to find the same man from yesterday, but this time he was closer. Close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair beneath his hat, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held that locket. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice rough like he didn't use it often. "I saw you here yesterday and I think we might need to talk." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "About what?" He held up the locket, and in the bright afternoon light, I could see that it wasn't just similar to mine, it was identical. Every curve, every detail, even the way the clasp was slightly tarnished on one side. "My wife buried this with her first husband," he said quietly. "Took it right off her neck and put it in his hands before they closed the casket. I was there. I saw her do it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible." "That's what I thought too." He took a step closer, and I could see that his eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. "But 3 days after the funeral, I found it in my truck, just sitting there on the dashboard like someone had placed it there." I pulled my own locket from beneath my shirt, holding it up so he could see. "This was my husband's first gift to me. I've worn it every day for 14 years. The man's face went pale. "May I?" I nodded, and he stepped close enough that I could smell the scent of horses and leather on his clothes. His fingers, surprisingly gentle for their size, touched the locket without taking it from my hands. "Ah, Jesus," he whispered. "They're exactly the same." "Who was your wife?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, before she married me. She died 2 years ago. Cancer." His voice broke slightly on the last word. "She was buried in the plot next to her first husband. Said she wanted to be with him again." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What was her first husband's name?" Michael Crawford." The ground seemed to fall away beneath my feet. "That's impossible. Thomas's middle name was Michael. Michael Crawford." The man, I still didn't know his name, stared at me with those storm-grey eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my husband might have been married before, to your wife." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "I'm saying that maybe everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie." We stood there in the cemetery, 2 broken people holding identical lockets, as the truth of what we'd discovered settled around us like fog. The man I'd loved for 15 years, the man I'd thought I knew better than myself, had kept a secret that was now staring me in the face. "I'm Catherine," I said finally. "Catherine Crawford. Jake Morrison," he replied, touching his hat brim again. "And I think we have a lot to figure out." Chapter 3. Unraveling the Truth. Jake Morrison and I sat in a small diner on the outskirts of Billings, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us as we tried to make sense of what we'd discovered. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the red vinyl booths, but neither of us seemed to notice. "Tell me about Sarah," I said, wrapping my hands around my mug for warmth I didn't really need. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the locket he'd placed on the table between us. "She was the kindest woman I ever knew. Worked as a nurse at the hospital, always bringing home stray animals and people who needed help. We met at her husband's funeral, actually." My stomach clenched. "What happened to him?" "Car accident. Drunk driver hit him head-on while he was driving home from work." Jake's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "Sarah was devastated. She'd been married to Michael for about 3 years, and she talked about him like he was the sun, and the moon rolled into one. I felt sick. When did this happen?" "About 17 years ago. Sarah and I got married 2 years later, after she'd had some time to grieve." Jake looked up at me, and I saw my own confusion reflected in his expression. "She kept his name hyphenated, Sarah Morrison Crawford. Said she couldn't bear to let go of that connection to him. 17 years ago, I'd met Thomas 18 years ago, when he'd just moved to Montana from, where had he said he was from?" The memory felt fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. He'd always been vague about his past. Said he preferred to focus on the future we were building together. "Jake," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. What did Michael look like?" Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through it for a minute before turning the screen toward me. "Sarah kept this photo in her wallet. Said it was their wedding day." I looked at the photo and felt the world crumble around me. The man in the picture was younger, maybe in his mid-20s, but there was no mistaking that smile, those warm brown eyes, the way his left eyebrow was slightly higher than his right. It was Thomas, my Thomas. "Oh my God," I whispered, covering my mouth with my hands. "What is it?" I couldn't speak. Instead, I fumbled for my own phone, scrolling through my photos until I found one of Thomas and me from our last anniversary. We were at a restaurant, both of us laughing at something the waiter had said. Thomas looked older, his hair grayer, but it was unmistakably the same man. Jake took my phone and stared at the photo for a long time. When he finally looked up, his face was ashen. "How is this possible?" "I don't know." My voice came out as a croak. "Jake, I think my husband faked his death. I think he left Sarah and came to Montana and started a new life with me. The diner felt too small, too warm. I needed air, needed space to think. Jake seemed to understand because he threw money on the table and followed me outside without a word. We stood in the parking lot, both of us breathing hard like we'd been running. The Montana sky was darkening, stars beginning to appear, but all I could think about was the lie I'd been living for 15 years. "And she mourned him," Jake said finally. "Sarah mourned him every day for the rest of her life. She used to cry on their anniversary, used to visit his grave and talk to him like he was still there." "And I loved him," I said, my voice breaking. "I loved him completely. We had a good marriage, Jake. We were happy. How could he do this to both of us?" Jake's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He let her think he was dead. He let her live with that grief while he was off playing house with someone else. The anger in his voice matched what I was feeling, but underneath it was something else, a deep, abiding sadness that I recognized because I felt it too. We'd both lost the people we loved, but now we were discovering that our grief was tangled together in ways we never could have imagined. "There has to be more to this story," I said. "People don't just fake their deaths and start new lives without a reason." Jake nodded slowly. Sarah kept boxes of Michael's things, photos, letters, documents. Maybe there's something there that could help us understand. I have things too. Thomas's papers, his old wallet, some letters he wrote me when we were dating. I paused, realizing what I was about to suggest. Jake, I think we need to investigate this together. We need to find out what really happened and why. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw my own determination reflected in his eyes. You're right. We both deserve to know the truth. As we stood there in the parking lot, two strangers bound together by the lies of the man we'd both loved, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. For the first time since Thomas's death, I had a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just going through the motions of living. We were going to find out who Thomas Michael Crawford really was, and we were going to do it together. Chapter 4. The Past Revealed. Jake's house was nothing like I'd expected. From the outside, it looked like a typical ranch property, practical, weathered, built for function over form. But inside, it was warm and welcoming, with photographs covering every surface and books stacked in corners like old friends. Sarah decorated it, Jake said, noticing me looking around. I haven't had the heart to change anything. I understood. Our house still had Thomas's coffee mug sitting by the sink, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite sweater draped over the back of his chair. Some things were too hard to put away. Jake led me to a spare bedroom that had been converted into a makeshift office. 3 cardboard boxes sat on a desk, each one labeled in careful handwriting, Michael's documents, Michael's photos, and Michael's personal items. I've been meaning to go through these for 2 years, Jake said, settling into a chair across from me. Sarah always said she'd do it when she was ready, but... He trailed off, the sentence hanging in the air between us. I pulled the first box toward me and opened it carefully. Inside were stacks of photographs, some in frames, others loose. The top photo was of a young woman with kind eyes and a brilliant smile, her arm around a man I recognized as Thomas. They looked so happy, so in love, it was like looking at a parallel version of my own life. She was beautiful, I said softly. Inside and out, Jake replied. Look at this one. He handed me a photo of Sarah and Thomas, Michael, at what looked like a county fair. They were sharing cotton candy and laughing, both of them covered in powdered sugar. On the back, someone had written, July 4th, 1987, our first official date. I did the math in my head. Jake, this was just a year before I met Thomas. If they were married for 3 years, I felt my chest tighten. He was with her until 1990, and I met him in 1989. Jake's face darkened. So he was married to Sarah when he met you. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Thomas faked his death, but he'd been having an affair. I'd been the other woman without even knowing it. Keep looking, Jake said grimly. There's more. The next box contained documents, marriage certificates, insurance papers, bank statements. But it was a manila envelope at the bottom that made my blood run cold. Inside were hospital records, doctor's notes, and what looked like a treatment plan. What is this? I asked, spreading the papers across the desk. Jake leaned over to read them. Looks like medical records. Sarah had some health issues when she was younger. Before I met her, he picked up one of the papers and frowned. This is from 1989. Says here she had a... Oh, what? A miscarriage. She was pregnant, and she lost the baby in her 2nd trimester. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. She never told me about this. I felt tears prick my eyes. She lost Thomas's baby. Around the same time, he would have been meeting you. Jake set the paper down carefully. God, Catherine, what if that's why he left? What if he couldn't handle the grief? I thought about the Thomas I'd known, the man who'd held me through my own struggles with infertility, who'd been so patient and understanding when we'd realized we couldn't have children. Had he learned that compassion from his own experience with loss? That doesn't excuse what he did, I said. But even as I said it, I could feel my anger softening into something more complicated. The third box was the heaviest. Inside were personal items, a pocket watch, some jewelry, and a thick leather journal. Jake handed me the journal without a word. The first entry was dated January 1989. Sarah is struggling more than she's letting on. The doctors say there's no medical reason she can't get pregnant again, but she's afraid. She won't talk about it, won't let me hold her when she cries. I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to fix this. I flipped through the pages, watching Thomas's handwriting evolve from hopeful to desperate to resigned. The entries painted a picture of a marriage slowly falling apart, of two people who loved each other but couldn't find their way back to each other through their grief. And then, in March 1989, I met someone today. Catherine. She works at the library, and she has the most beautiful smile. I wasn't looking for this, didn't want it, but when she laughed at my stupid joke about overdue books, I felt something I haven't felt in months. I felt hope. My hands were shaking as I read my own origin story through Thomas's eyes. He wrote about our early dates, about how easy it was to talk to me, about how I made him feel like he could be someone new, someone who wasn't drowning in loss. But he also wrote about Sarah. She deserves better than what I'm giving her. She deserves someone who can love her without being reminded of what we lost every time he looks at her. Maybe if I disappear, she can heal. Maybe she can find someone who won't break her heart over and over just by existing. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before the supposed accident. I've made arrangements. It has to look real, or Sarah will come looking for me. I've found someone who can help me disappear, start fresh. It's cowardly, I know, but I can't keep hurting her, and I can't keep pretending that I'm not already gone. I closed the journal and looked at Jake, who was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. He didn't fake his death for selfish reasons, I said quietly. He did it because he thought it would free Sarah to find happiness. With me, Jake said. She found happiness with me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what we'd discovered settling around us. Thomas hadn't been a villain. He'd been a broken man who'd made a terrible choice out of love and grief. But that didn't make the pain any less real for any of us. Jake, I said finally, I think we need to decide what to do with this information. Do we tell anyone? Do we let sleeping dogs lie? Jake looked at the boxes, then at me. I think, he said slowly, that we're the only ones who need to know. Sarah's gone. Thomas is gone. This is our burden to carry now. I nodded, understanding what he meant. We were connected now, Jake and I, bound together by the secrets of the dead and the weight of a truth that no one else could understand. Chapter 5. Finding Peace. 6 months after that day in Jake's house, I was back at the cemetery. But this time I wasn't alone. Jake stood beside me, his weathered hands holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Sarah's favorites, he'd told me. We'd developed a routine of sorts, visiting our spouses, graves together, sharing the weight of our complicated grief. I brought those letters Thomas wrote to you, Jake said, nodding toward the small bundle in my hands. The ones where he talks about his dreams for the future, I smiled sadly. And I brought the photo Sarah kept of their wedding day, the one where they both look so young and hopeful. We walked slowly between the headstones, the Montana sun warm on our faces. It was spring now, and the cemetery was dotted with new flowers and fresh grass, life pushing through death, hope growing from loss. I knelt at Thomas's grave first, placing the wedding photo against the headstone. I brought you something, I said softly, and a reminder of who you were before you became the man I fell in love with. Jake knelt beside me, his presence a comfort I'd come to depend on. I used to be angry at him, he said, for leaving Sarah, for lying to you, but now you understand, I finished. He was just a man trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. We moved to Sarah's grave next, and I watched Jake arrange the wildflowers with the same gentle care he'd shown everything connected to his wife. Her headstone was simple but beautiful. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, beloved wife, devoted nurse, friend to all. "I brought you a letter," Jake said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Catherine. She wanted you to know that Thomas spoke about you sometimes, in his sleep. That part of him never stopped loving you." I had written that letter 3 days ago, after another sleepless night spent thinking about the woman who'd unknowingly shaped my life. It had taken me months to work up the courage to put my feelings into words, but I'd needed Sarah to know that I didn't see her as my enemy. We were both victims of the same broken heart. "Do you think they would have wanted us to be friends?" I asked Jake as we walked back toward our cars. Jake considered this for a moment. "I think they would have wanted us to be happy. And maybe this is what happiness looks like for us now." He was right. In the months since we'd discovered the truth, Jake and I had become something I'd never expected. True friends. We understood each other's grief in a way that no one else could. We could sit in comfortable silence, share memories of our lost loves, and support each other through the hard days without judgment or awkwardness. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to Jake. He opened it carefully, revealing a silver picture frame. Inside was a photo I'd found in Thomas's things, one I'd never seen before. It showed Thomas and Sarah at Christmas, probably from their first year of marriage. They were decorating a tree, and Thomas was lifting Sarah up to place a star on top. Both of them were laughing, completely lost in the joy of the moment. "Where did you find this?" Jake asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It was tucked inside one of his books. I think he kept it all these years, even after he started his new life." I touched his arm gently. "I thought you should have it. Sarah looks so happy." Jake stared at the photo for a long time, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "She does," he whispered. "She really does." We stood there in the cemetery parking lot. Two people who'd found an unexpected friendship in the ruins of their shattered lives. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in those brilliant colors that Thomas had always loved. "Jake," I said, "I want you to know something. These past months, getting to know you, learning about Sarah, understanding what really happened, it's helped me heal in ways I never expected." "Me too," he said, carefully tucking the photo into his jacket. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life angry at the world, but you've shown me that there's room for more than just grief." As we prepared to go our separate ways, I realized that Thomas's greatest gift to me hadn't been the 15 years of marriage, or the love he'd given me, or even the locket I still wore every day. His greatest gift had been leading me to Jake, to this friendship that had grown from the ashes of our shared loss. "The same time next week?" Jake asked, touching the brim of his hat in that familiar gesture. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. Driving home that evening, I thought about the strange turns life could take. I'd lost a husband, discovered he'd been living a lie, and found a friend who understood my pain better than anyone else ever could. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I could live with. The locket felt warm against my chest, a reminder of the love that had been real, even if it had been built on secrets. And maybe that was enough. Maybe love didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Maybe healing didn't have to look the way we expected. Maybe sometimes the best thing we can do is forgive the dead their mistakes and find a way to honor the living with our friendship. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw that Jake had already texted me, "Thank you for today. Sarah would have liked you." I smiled and typed back, "Thomas would have been glad we found each other." And somehow, I knew that was true. The end. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of love, loss, and the beautiful complications of being human. Don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Your stories and support mean the world to me. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful connections come from the most unexpected places.